in a town where everyone knows your secrets. Eleanor Hawthorne thought she knew her family's worst, her stepdaughter's icy heart and her late husband's quiet regret. But when a single gunshot echoes through the stormy night, and her only son is named the killer, she learns the deepest poison grows closest to the roots. Now, this gentle grandmother must unravel a perfect lie spun by a perfect widow, before the truth and the only family she has left is buried forever. In the town of Eldridge Hollow, where morning mist clung to the wooded hills like lingering regret, the past was never truly buried. It grew, instead, in the quiet gardens and behind the polished doors of the old homes, tended by memory and watered by silence. For 72-year-old Eleanor Hawthorne, her past was a tapestry woven on a loom of quiet joys and accepted sorrows, its patterns visible in the heirloom roses that climbed the trellis of her cottage. Whispering pines, each Sunday. This tapestry was warmed by the presence of her son, Thomas, a man in his 50s whose kind eyes and accountant's demeanor spoke of order and gentle loyalty. His visits were the anchor of her weeks, a ritual of tea and talk that fortified her against the town's other, colder shadow, the permanent frost that was her stepdaughter, Miranda. Miranda, Arthur's daughter from his first marriage, was a sculpture of elegant resentment. At 45, she resided not in a home, but in an estate, a sprawling, the Georgian manor that was her gilded cage. Marriage to Victor Langston having proven a transaction where her youth and beauty were traded for his wealth and volatility. Vic, a man who built his real estate empire on the rubble of broken deals and broken people, wielded cruelty like a blunt instrument, and Miranda had spent 2 decades perfecting the art of absorbing its blows without seeming to flinch. To Eleanor, Miranda was Arthur's great, unspoken sorrow, a daughter whose heart had hardened towards him when he'd found happiness again, and whose chilly disdain for Eleanor and Thomas was as much a part of the family landscape as the pines. That gave the cottage its name. Eleanor's own sorrow, the loss of Arthur 5 years prior, was a familiar ache, a hollow space she had learned to live around. She believed these were the boundaries of her heart's battlefield, grief for a husband gone and a feudal, weary sadness for a stepchild forever out of reach. She did not know that Miranda's ledger of grievances was not just a list, but a blueprint. In Miranda's meticulously ordered mind, every perceived slight was catalogued. The warmth Arthur showed Thomas, a warmth she felt stolen from her. The modest security of Eleanor's life, which she viewed as a portion of her inheritance, diverted. The very existence of Thomas, a living symbol of the happy family she was excluded from. Her marriage to Victor was the final, bitter entry, a daily humiliation that fermented in the dark cellar of her spirit. And she had found a fellow conspirator for her misery in David Croft, a banker with flexible morals and access to Victor's labyrinthine finances. Together, they had begun weaving a separate future, thread by clandestine thread, siphoning funds into shadow accounts. But escape was not enough for Miranda. She required recompense. She required a stage for her vengeance. The opportunity presented itself when Thomas, ever loyal and now desperate, his small accounting practice buckling under a recession, went to Victor for a loan. It was a decision born of familial connection, however strained, and it ended in disaster. At a tense, awful dinner at Langston Manor, Victor eviscerated Thomas over the soup course, calling him a fool, a failure, and worse. Thomas, pushed past his gentle limits, had stood, his voice trembling not with fear but with a lifetime of repressed frustration. "You'll pay for this, Victor," he'd said, the words vague but heavy in the opulent dining room. "This isn't over." He'd stormed out into the gathering twilight, leaving behind a fuming Victor and Miranda, whose eyes glittered with a serpentine revelation. The final piece had clicked into place. The storm that arrived the following Thursday was meteorological and metaphorical. Rain lashed the windows of Eldridge Hollow and wind screamed through the pines. Thomas, ashamed and heartsick, sat alone in his modest home, nursing a glass of whiskey in his wounded pride. Eleanor, at Whispering Pines, felt a deep, unshakable dread settle in her bones, a maternal antenna quivering at a frequency of impending doom. At the manor, Miranda moved with the calm precision of a surgeon. She lured Victor to his oak-paneled study under the pretense of discussing the Croft-assisted financial transfers, playing on his greed. The argument was brief. Victor's contempt met Miranda's cold, final resolve. The report of the antique Webley revolver was swallowed by a peal of thunder. What followed was not panic, but procedure. She wiped the gun clean of her prints, placed it in Victor's slack hand, adjusting his fingers. From her pocket, she produced a note, forged over weeks by studying Thomas's old letters and bank memos. "You'll pay for what you've done." She tucked it into the desk blotter. She then performed the last critical act. She removed Victor's heavy gold signet ring apiece. He never took off, and the latex gloves she wore, now speckled with a fine mist of evidence, bundling them together. Slipping out the French doors into the tempest, she navigated to the far edge of the property and buried the small bundle deep in the abandoned compost heap. Returning, she dialed 911, and by the time the first siren wailed through the storm, her voice was a masterpiece of shattered glass and terrified accusation. "It's Thomas," she sobbed to the dispatcher, the performance utterly convincing. "He was here. He threatened Victor. Oh, God. There's so much blood." When the police arrived, they found a tableau of tragic suicide manipulated by a master artist. The note was discovered. Miranda, draped in a robe, her face a mask of exquisite trauma, poured her poison into receptive ears. The recent, very public argument, Thomas's financial desperation, his violent threats. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Thomas's fingerprints were on the study door from his fateful visit days before. He had no alibi, having been alone. The motive was clear. The following dawn, 2 police cars pulled up the gravel drive of Whispering Pines. Eleanor, watching from her window, felt the world tilt. The arrest was a slow-motion nightmare. Amis's bewildered protestations, the cold click of handcuffs, the spectacle of it on her own front steps as a neighbor's curtain twitched. Eldridge Hollow, a town that thrived on whispers, had its feast of the century. The mild-mannered accountant, a killer. Eleanor's first visit to the county jail was a descent into a new kind of hell. Thomas, in a jumpsuit, looked shrunken, his eyes hollow with a terror that was less about incarceration and more about the monstrous reflection the world now saw. "Mother, I swear I could never," he whispered, his voice breaking. She took his hands, her own not trembling. "I know, my boy, I know." In that moment, the grieving matriarch was shed like a skin. What remained was an investigator, a hunter of truth, and she had already spotted her first clue. In her initial, frantic conversation with Miranda at the manor, Miranda had shuddered. "I found him in his burgundy smoking jacket. He looked almost peaceful." But the police report, Eleanor had bagged a glance that mentioned a Navy business suit, a small thing, a detail a traumatized person might misremember. But Eleanor knew Miranda never misremembered anything. It was a lie, a thread. Pulling that thread would require tools she did not possess. She hired Malcolm Boone, a retired city detective who had moved to Eldridge Hollow for its quiet and found himself haunted by it instead. Boone was a man of methodical patience and a deep cynicism softened by Eleanor's unwavering conviction. They became an unlikely duo. The elegant grandmother with an encyclopedic knowledge of human hearts, and the weary detective who knew the maps of their deceit. While Miranda, now the tragic, wealthy widow, held court-giving, tearful interviews, chairing charity events, and working with David Croft to solidify her financial liberation. Eleanor and Boone began in the shadows. They spoke to the Langstons' quietly terrified housekeeper, who mentioned Miranda's unusual calm that evening. They met the gardener, who noted the disturbed earth near the old compost bin weeks prior, and they found Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly neighbor whose insomnia and bay window gave her a ringside seat to the manor's back doors. She was terrified, speaking of men who make problems go away, but Eleanor, with a shared history of lost husbands and lemon cake recipes, gently pried the truth loose, the glimpse of a figure in the lashing rain, gloves on, slipping something small and metallic into the ground at the property's edge. The investigation was a slow unearthing of poison. Boone, using his contacts, had traced the financial threads to David Croft, revealing the embezzlement scheme, a powerful motive of greed and escape. But they needed tangible proof. One moonless night, with Boone's flashlight cutting through the damp dark, they dug into the foul, rich decay of the compost heap. The smell was earthy and profound. And there it was, a oilcloth bundle inside, Victor's signet ring and the latex gloves, inside out. With a microscopic spray of blood the rain had not washed away. It was not the gun, but it was better. It placed Miranda at the scene after the fact, disposing of evidence, and it directly contradicted her story of finding the body. Armed with this, Boone went to a sympathetic detective on the force, creating a crucial rift. The district attorney, facing the collapse of his case against Thomas, ordered a re-examination. The state's ballistic expert, under new directives, delivered the coup de grace. The angle of the entry wound was physically impossible for a self-inflicted shot from Victor's own hand. The suicide theory evaporated. Confronted with the financial evidence and the accessory to murder charge, David Croft's resolve crumbled. He gave up the alibi he'd provided Miranda, placing her at a city hotel with him, an alibi now proven false by the physical evidence. The walls, so carefully constructed, were tumbling down. Miranda, sensing the shift in the air, made her move. Boone anticipated it. Her attempted flight to a non-extradition country was halted on the tarmac of a private airfield, a scene of silent fury and flashing police lights. In the interrogation room, under the relentless pressure of the new evidence, her flawless facade finally shattered, but what emerged was not remorse. It was a geyser of stored venom, a confession that was a weapon in itself. She spat her hatred for Victor, his abuse, his dominance, and then she turned her eyes, flat and cold, to the unseen presence of Eleanor and Thomas. He deserved it. And Thomas? He was the perfect patsy, always the good son, the beloved son, Arthur's real child. She leaned forward, her voice a whisper of pure malice. He got the love, so I took his freedom. It's only fair. It was the final, chilling revelation. The murder was not just an escape, but a perverse act of familial revenge decades in the making. Thomas walked out of the jail into a sunlight that felt alien, his mother's arms around him the only anchor to reality. The town's whispers now curdled into awkward apology and averted gazes. His recovery was slow, the trauma a stain on his soul. But guided by Eleanor's steady light, he found a new purpose. using his meticulous mind to help others who had been wrongfully accused. Miranda's trial was swift and merciless. The evidence was an avalanche. Eleanor, called to the stand, did not rage or weep. She spoke with a devastating, yet quiet clarity about the family Miranda had chosen to annihilate, painting a portrait of a love offered and repeatedly, violently rejected. The sentence, life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole, echoed in the packed courtroom. As the bailiffs led Miranda away, she turned for a final time, her gaze seeking Eleanor's in the crowd. It was a glare of undiminished hatred, a winter that would never thaw. Eleanor held it, her own eyes showing not forgiveness, nor even pity, but a profound, unyielding justice. It was the acknowledgement of the poison and its final, complete neutralization. Years softened the sharp edges of the trauma in Eldridge Hollow. Thomas, though forever marked, found a gentle happiness, eventually marrying and fathering a child. Eleanor's roses, tended with the same patient resolve she had applied to saving her son, grew more magnificent with each passing season, a riot of color and scent against the green backdrop of the pines. Once a year, on the anniversary of the arrest, Eleanor would make a solitary journey to the women's penitentiary. She would not request a visit. She would simply sit in the visitor's lot for a time, her eyes on the stark, wire-topped walls. It was not a vigil of forgiveness. It was a silent witness, a reminder that the consequences of the poison she had unearthed were enduring, and that the garden, against all odds, still flourished. One golden afternoon, much later, Eleanor sat on her cottage porch, a shawl around her shoulders. In the garden, Thomas laughed, chasing his squealing toddler between the rose beds. The sound was a melody she had once feared she would never hear again. She watched them, the dappled light playing on their faces. The tapestry of her life now mended with threads of resilience and hard-won truth. The family she had tended, the family she had chosen and fought for, was alive, and loved, and safe. The storm had passed, and in its wake, there was not just peace, but a profound and blooming justice. Now, I will complete the next part of this story, including new plot lines, character depth, and a full conclusion. 5 years after Thomas's release, Eldridge Hollow had changed. Thomas had opened a small legal center where he helped the poor and victims of injustice. It was called the Hawthorne Justice Initiative, in a small office in the building next to Eleanor's cottage, where he spent his days buried in files. One winter evening, Eleanor was in her garden, mulching the roots of her roses, when an old car stopped at her gate. A young woman stepped out in her early 20s, with the same bitter expression Miranda once wore. "I'm Serena Langston," she said, her voice trembling. "Miranda is my mother." Serena sat on a chair in front of Eleanor, wringing her hands. She took out a letter in an official prison envelope. "She's dying," Serena said. "Cancer. She gave me this letter for you." Eleanor opened the letter. Miranda's handwriting was the same, straight and merciless. "Eleanor, you thought you had won. You haven't. You only ended one war. Now another begins. My daughter is at your door. She knows everything I did, and she will tell you what the real truth was. Perhaps now you'll understand how deep roots can go." Miranda Serena told her story. She was Miranda and Victor's only child, but she had been sent to a Swiss boarding school as a child. Miranda had never loved her, considering her a mistake. That night of the murder, Serena said, holding back tears, "I was here. During school holidays, I saw it." Eleanor's heart stopped. "What did you see, child?" "I saw that after my mother shot my father, she didn't put the gun in his hand. She went outside, took the gun with her, and threw it into the river. Then she came back and with her own hands She put another gun in his hand, the old display revolver that hung on the wall. This new information changed everything. The gun presented at the trial was a decorative piece from Victor's collection, one that had never been fired. The real murder weapon had never been found. Miranda had misled the police. But she had told her daughter the truth, perhaps because she knew. Serena would never speak. "She used to threaten me," Serena said. "She said if I ever spoke, she would have me killed too. But now that she's dying, I think the truth should come out." Eleanor picked up the phone. Malcolm Boone was now 70, but his voice still had the same sharpness. "Eleanor? What's wrong?" "Malcolm, we have to work again," Boone returned. Now he and Eleanor, along with Thomas and Serena, began examining this newly opened case. Serena's testimony was crucial, but there were legal challenges. She had been a child when she witnessed the events, and her testimony now would be difficult to rely upon. The search for the real gun began. Serena said Miranda had thrown it into the Eldridge River at a specific spot where the water was deep and the current strong. A professional diving team was hired. After 3 days of searching, the memory of a retired police officer proved helpful in old, unsolved case mentioning a similar weapon. On the 4th day, divers recovered an old Webley revolver buried in mud and silt. It was the same model Victor owned. The forensic team examined the fingerprints, blood traces, and cartridge residue on it. The results were startling. The gun bore only Victor's and Miranda's fingerprints, not Thomas's. This evidence made it clear that Miranda had first fired the real gun, thrown it into the river, and then staged the scene with the display revolver. Miranda's condition had worsened. She had been moved to the prison hospital. Eleanor decided to visit her. In the hospital room, Miranda lay on the bed, her body frail from illness, but her eyes still held that familiar sharpness. "You came," she said weakly. "Your daughter told us everything," Eleanor said. Miranda gave a faint smile. "Serena always was weak, like you." "She's stronger than you," Eleanor replied. She had the courage to speak the truth. Miranda closed her eyes. "You think you've won, but what do you have left? An empty garden, a broken son, and a truth that will haunt you forever." "Our victory isn't about what we lost," Eleanor said. "It's about what we saved." In light of the new evidence, Thomas's case was officially closed. The county issued an apology, and Thomas received compensation, which he used for his initiative. Miranda's case was reopened, but she passed away before her sentence could be revisited. Her death ended the legal proceedings, but the truth had already become part of history. Serena decided to stay in Eldridge Hollow. Victor's estate, which had legally passed to her after lengthy proceedings, was sold. Some of the money went to the Hawthorne Justice Initiative, and the rest helped her open a small art studio. She began living close to Eleanor. A strange bond formed between them, a girl whose mother had never loved her, and a woman whose son had nearly been lost because of that same mother. 5 more years passed. Eldridge Hollow was now completely transformed. Thomas had married his wife, was a lawyer who worked at his initiative. They had a daughter, whom they named Eleonora, in honor of Eleanor. Serena's art studio became well known. Her paintings often featured rose gardens and old buildings, as if she were capturing her past on canvas to reclaim it. Eleanor was now 80 years old. One day, she called Thomas, Serena, and her granddaughter Eleonora to her side. She announced her will. Whispering Pines would go to Thomas. Her rose garden would be tended by Serena, and all her savings, modest as they were, would go to the Hawthorne Justice Initiative. "Family isn't about blood," she said, holding her granddaughter. "It's about the people you choose." protect, and fight for. Eleanor passed away peacefully. One spring morning, she fell asleep in her chair, a rose in her hand and a smile on her face. The whole of Eldridge Hollow attended her funeral. Even those who had once been against her came Miranda's old servants. Victor's enemies, everyone was there. Thomas gave a speech. "My mother didn't give me life once, she gave it to me twice. First when she bore me, and again when she proved my innocence." After Eleanor's passing, her legacy lived on. Thomas's initiative had grown into a national organization, helping dozens of innocent people every year. Serena turned the Rose Garden into a public park named the Hawthorne Garden of Justice. A plaque at the entrance read, "Here grow roses that bloom in every season." Just as truth triumphs in every hardship, family is not made by blood, but by those nurtured with love. Eleanor's granddaughter, had grown up. She became a lawyer, following in her father and grandmother's footsteps. One day, she helped a young boy who had been wrongly accused of theft. After winning the case, the boy's mother was in tears. "How did you know he was innocent?" she asked Eleonora. Eleonora smiled and said, "My grandmother taught me that truth is always hidden in the small details. You just need the eyes to see it." Today, in Eldridge Hollow, every visitor makes sure to visit the Hawthorne Garden. Hundreds of rose varieties grow there, each with its own fragrance and color. Locals say that at night, when the moon rises, you can see an elderly woman tending the roses in the garden. She talks to them, waters them, and prunes them. And if you listen closely, you might hear her say, "Roots run deep." It's true. But roses always grow toward the light. Always. Thomas still visits the garden every Sunday. He comes with his daughter and grandchildren. He tells them the story of each rose when it was planted, who cared for it, and what memory it keeps alive. And as the sun sets and the shadows lengthen, they all hold hands, blood relatives, chosen family, all bound together by the ties of love and justice. Because true family isn't what you give, it's what you protect, what you fight for, and what you choose to keep forever. 5 years had settled like autumn leaves over Eldridge Hollow covering, but never truly erasing what lay beneath. Eleanor Hawthorne's victory had become local legend. The rose garden at Whispering Pines bloomed more fiercely each year, as if nourished by the truth it had witnessed. Thomas's Hawthorne Justice Initiative operated from a converted carriage house behind the cottage, its modest sign a beacon for the wrongfully accused. The town had largely forgiven itself for its rush to judgment, as towns do, preferring the simpler story, the good woman who saved her son. Eleanor, now 77, knew stories were rarely that simple. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, the kind of crisp October morning that mirrored the one when Victor Langston died. Not in the mail, hand-delivered by a uniformed courier who refused to meet her eyes. The envelope was heavy linen, embossed with the seal of the state correctional facility for women. No return address was needed. Inside a single sheet of paper, the handwriting unmistakable, that controlled, vertical script that looked like it had been drawn with a ruler. Eleanor, you tend your roses and think the poison is gone. You visit your son in his little office and think justice has been served. How quaint. But roots grow deeper than you dig. Rivers keep secrets better than graves. You found what I wanted you to find. You stopped where I wanted you to stop. You won a battle against a woman already in a cage. How brave. If you want to know what really happened that night, if Thomas truly wants his full innocence, tell him to. Ask about the inheritance his father never received. Ask why Arthur really married you. Then follow the river to where it meets the old mill. A ghost doesn't need a signature. Eleanor read it 3 times as the tea grew cold in her cup. The words didn't frighten her after surviving the wreckage of a murder trial. Fear had lost its potency, but they interested her. Miranda, from her life sentence, was still playing chess, and this felt like the opening of an endgame. "That's ridiculous," Thomas said that evening, pacing the length of Eleanor's sitting room. "She's manipulating you from prison. It's what she does." "Probably," Eleanor agreed, calmly pruning a potted rose on the table between them. "But the inheritance reference, your father never mentioned any missing inheritance." "Because there wasn't one. Dad was a history teacher. Mom, he left us the cottage, his books, and enough to bury him decently. There was no great fortune." Eleanor snipped a dead head. "There was the trust for Miranda's education." Thomas stopped pacing. "What trust?" "The one his first wife, Catherine, set up. It was substantial. Arthur was the executor. When Catherine died young, the trust was to pass to Miranda at 25. With Arthur managing it until then." Thomas sat slowly. "How do you know this?" "Arthur told me when we married. He showed me the documents. It was important to him that I understood." Miranda was provided for. Eleanor's memory was sharp as the shears in her hand. "He said the trust was handled by a firm in Boston, Langford and Croft." "Croft?" Thomas's head snapped up. "As in David Croft? Miranda's banker lover?" "The same firm, yes. Though David would have been a junior associate then. His father was senior partner." The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the first stars pricked the twilight. "Why would Miranda lie about an inheritance she did receive?" Thomas asked. "Perhaps," Eleanor said, placing the shears down with a soft click because she didn't receive it. "Not all of it." Malcolm Boone, now 73 and officially retired from even retirement consulting, met them at South Station in Boston 2 days later. He looked like a weathered hawk in a trench coat, but his eyes still held that quick, assessing light. "Langford and Croft dissolved 15 years ago," he said, steering them through the bustling station. "Old man Croft died. Langford retired to Florida, but I found the junior partner who handled the Hawthorne account. Name's Peter Vance." "He's nervous." Vance's current office was in a back bay. Brown stone that smelled of lemon polish and old money. A man in his late 60s. He had the carefully maintained appearance of someone clinging to respectability by his fingernails. "Arthur Hawthorne's estate was straightforward," Vance said, avoiding their eyes. "The trust for Miranda Langston was dispersed in full upon her 25th birthday. I have the records." "Electronic records can be altered," Boone said mildly, "and paper records from a defunct firm have a way of disappearing. But people's memories, those are harder to erase." Vance's hand shook as he poured himself water. "I don't appreciate the implication." "Then appreciate this," Thomas said, leaning forward. My stepsister, is serving life for murder. She's hinting that my father's estate wasn't what it seemed. That maybe her motive wasn't just escaping Victor, but reclaiming something she thought was stolen. Help us understand, or we take our questions to the Bar Association." The threat landed like a stone in still water. Vance sank into his chair. "Arthur wasn't just a beneficiary," he whispered. "He was a testator. Catherine's will had a conditional clause. The document Vance produced from a hidden safe was yellowed at the edges, smelling of time and secrecy. Catherine Hawthorne's will, written 6 months before her death from breast cancer at 38. "I advised against this clause," Vance said, spreading the pages with reverent dread. "But she was adamant." Eleanor read aloud, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Should my husband Arthur remarry? The trust established for our daughter. Miranda shall be divided equally between Miranda and any biological child of his subsequent marriage, provided said child is raised with knowledge of and respect for our family legacy." Eleanor read aloud, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Should my husband Arthur remarry? The trust established for our daughter, Miranda, shall be divided equally between Miranda and any biological child of his subsequent marriage, provided said child is raised with knowledge of and respect for our family legacy." Thomas looked like he'd been struck. She wanted her estate shared with me? Conditionally, Vance said. You had to be taught about Catherine's family, the Aldridges. They were old Boston money, shipping magnates. Catherine was the last direct descendant. She wanted the legacy remembered. But I never knew, Thomas said, bewildered. Dad never mentioned the Aldridges, never taught me about them. Because, Eleanor said softly, the pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. Arthur never told you about the clause, and he never told Miranda it existed. Vance nodded, miserable. He came to me a year after marrying you, Eleanor, said he wanted the trust to go entirely to Miranda, that he would provide for Thomas separately. He said blending the families was hard enough without legal complications. So he hid it, Boone said. He amended the disbursement, yes. The full trust went to Miranda on her 25th birthday. Over $2 million in 1998. Thomas did the math, his accountant's mind instantly calculating. That trust would be worth over $6 million today, half of which should have been mine. And Miranda knew, Eleanor realized. Somehow, she found out. She thought we'd stolen from her. Not just her father's affection, her inheritance. They returned to Eldridge Hollow with the weight of the unspoken between them. Arthur, beloved Arthur, had kept a secret that spanned decades. Lie of omission that had, perhaps, fertilized the very ground from which Miranda's hatred grew. The next morning, Eleanor stood at the edge of the Eldridge River where it bent sharply before the ruins of the old textile mill. Miranda's letter had specifically mentioned this spot. The water here was deep and restless, churning over submerged machinery from a century past. Boone's arranging a dive team, Thomas said, joining her. But Ma, even if we find something, what does it change? Miranda's still guilty. I'm still innocent. It changes the story, Eleanor said, watching the water. It changes why, and sometimes the why matters as much as the what. She thought of Arthur Kind, bookish Arthur who had loved history but been afraid of conflict, who had chosen the clean lie over the messy truth, who had perhaps unintentionally set a time bomb in his own family. The dive team arrived at noon, 2 professionals in dry suits carrying sonar equipment. They worked efficiently, sweeping the riverbed where the current had carved a deep pool behind the mill's foundation. It's a graveyard down here, one diver called up. Wheels, gears, part of a locomotive someone dumped a century ago. Then, after 2 hours, got something metallic. Not iron, brass, or copper, box-shaped. They brought it up in a sling, a corroded safe, about 18 inches square, covered in river silt and clinging weeds. Its lock was rusted shut, but the manufacturer's plate was still visible. Aldridge and Sons, Boston. The Aldridge family, Thomas breathed. They took it to Boone's garage, where he carefully pried it open with tools that looked surgical. Inside, protected by the airtight seal, were documents wrapped in oilcloth. Not financial records, letters. The top bundle was tied with faded ribbon. Catherine Hawthorne's diary, spanning the last 2 years of her life. Eleanor read it that night by the fire, her glasses perched on her nose. The writing was elegant, intelligent, and increasingly desperate. April 12, 1982, told Arthur about the clause today. He says I'm being unfair to any future family he might have. But it's not about fairness. It's about legacy. The Aldridge name ends with me. I want it to mean something beyond a footnote in Boston society columns, September 3rd, 1982. The treatments are worse than the disease. Miranda is so angry at me for being sick, at Arthur for not being able to fix it. She's only 12. She shouldn't have to carry this. January 15th, 1983. Last will meeting today. Arthur signed. He understands. Miranda must share with any half-sibling, but only if they're taught our history. It's my bridge between the past and future. My peace offering. The final entry 2 days before her death. February 28th, 1983. Arthur promised. He gave me his word. The clause stands. Our daughter will not be alone in remembering us. The river keeps secrets, but paper remembers. I put a copy with the mill deeds, just in case. Eleanor lowered the diary, her eyes stinging. She knew Arthur might try to change it. She left evidence. Beneath the diary were deeds to the mill property, not in the Langston name, but held in a trust for Miranda Catherine Hawthorne and any full or half siblings, and beneath those a single, newer envelope, addressed to Miranda in Arthur's handwriting, postmarked 6 months before his death. My dearest Miranda, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you found what I hid. First, know that I loved you. I loved your mother. And I have carried my failure to you both like a stone in my chest for 25 years. I broke my promise to your mother. When I married Eleanor and Thomas was born, I saw a chance for a clean start. A simple life. The Aldridge legacy felt like a weight, not an inheritance. I thought if you never knew about the clause, you'd never feel cheated. I thought I was protecting you from resentment. I was wrong. I was a coward. The trust should have been split. Thomas's share is in a separate account at First Eldridge. The paperwork is in my desk Bible, between Psalms. The account number is your mother's birthday. I have tried to tell you 100 times, but your anger toward Mita or toward Eleanor felt insurmountable. Another failure. Forgive me if you can. And share what is rightfully your brother's, not because the law says so, but because family is more than blood or money. It's the truth we tell when it's hardest. With all my love. Dad, Thomas wept when Eleanor read it aloud. Silent, shaking tears for the father he thought he knew, for the complicated man he was only now meeting. She never found this, he said finally. If she had, Boone finished grimly. She might have had a very different conversation with Victor that night. She might have been coming for the money, not just revenge. The prison visiting room felt different this time. Miranda was already seated when Eleanor entered, wearing the standard issue blue scrubs. Her hair gone fully gray and cut brutally short. But her eyes, those hadn't changed. Cold, clear, and utterly focused. You took your time, Miranda said. I wanted to be sure. Eleanor replied, sitting. Your father's letter. Why didn't you use it at trial? It would have given you a financial motive the jury might have understood, even sympathized with. Miranda's smile was thin as paper. And admit my precious father cheated me? Let the world know Arthur Hawthorne was a liar? No, some betrayals are private, but you wanted us to find it. Why? Because Miranda leaned forward, the chains on her wrists clinking softly. I wanted you to know your saintly Arthur was just as flawed as the rest of us. I wanted Thomas to know his inheritance was petty money from beyond the grave. I wanted you both to sit with that truth. Eleanor studied her stepdaughter, this woman who had chosen vengeance over reclamation, who had framed an innocent man rather than confront the real thief. You could have had $3 million and your freedom. Instead, you have a life sentence. Was it worth it? Miranda's composure cracked for just a second, a fissure through which Eleanor saw not hatred, but an ocean of grief. My mother died asking me to remember her. My father died asking me to forget. You and Thomas got the life that was supposed to be mine. The money was just the scorecard." She leaned back, the mask restored. "But you didn't come for philosophy. You came because you know there's more." The river had two secrets. The divers went back to the river the next day, this time searching further. Downstream where the mill's outflow pipe had once discharged, there, tangled in the roots of a fallen willow. They found it, a smaller, lead-lined box, the kind used for preserving photographs. Inside, wrapped in more oilcloth, were photographs of Catherine Aldridge Hawthorne, not as a dying woman, but vibrant, laughing, standing before the very mill that was now ruins. And with her, in several pictures, a man who was not Arthur, Jonathan Croft, Boone identified, showing them a society page photo from the 1970s. David's uncle, partner in the family firm. The final item was a birth certificate for a male child. Born to Catherine Aldridge, father listed as Jonathan Croft. Ask the date, 9 months before her marriage to Arthur. "But this child's name," Thomas said, squinting at the faded ink. "It's blank." "No," Eleanor said softly. "It's been deliberately obscured, but look at the filing date." The certificate had been filed not at birth, but a year later, and in the margin, in Catherine's hand, for Miranda, when she's old enough to understand her true legacy. Miranda wasn't Arthur's biological daughter, Boone concluded, the pieces falling into place with awful symmetry. She was a Croft. That's why Old Man Croft's firm handled the trust so carefully. That's why David Croft got involved with her. Maybe he knew they were cousins. The whole inheritance wasn't just money. It was identity. Thomas sat back heavily, and she never knew. All that anger at Dad for favoring me? When biologically, I wasn't even his. They returned to the prison with copies of everything. Miranda examined the birth certificate with an expression Eleanor couldn't read, not shock, not anger, but something like grim satisfaction. "I found this box 6 months before Victor died," Miranda said, her voice curiously flat. "David told me stories about a scandal his uncle covered up, an affair with a client, a child given another man's name. I went looking. Why didn't you say anything?" Miranda cut Thomas off. "And admit my whole life was a lie? That Arthur wasn't my father? That my mother had her own secrets? No, some truths don't set you free. They just explain the case." She looked at Eleanor, and for the first time, there was no malice in her gaze. Only exhaustion. "You wanted to know the real why. Here it is. Victor was going to leave me. He'd found someone younger. I was going to lose everything, my marriage, my home, my standing. But I knew about the inheritance clause. With Victor gone, I'd get everything. The life insurance, the estate, and with Thomas in prison for killing him, I'd get his share of the trust too. The full Aldridge inheritance. Finally." She shrugged, a small, brittle motion. "Then I found the second box and realized the Aldridge inheritance was never mine to begin with. I killed a man and destroyed a family for money that belonged to a stranger, for a name that wasn't mine." The room was silent, save for the hum of fluorescent lights. "What now?" Miranda asked, almost politely. "Now," Eleanor said, standing. "Thomas files for his share of the trust. The money goes to the Justice Initiative. We publish Catherine's diaries. Let her legacy be remembered as she wanted. And you live with the knowledge that your mother loved you enough to try to give you a history, and your father, flawed as he was, chose you as his daughter every single day." For a moment, Miranda's face softened, and Eleanor saw the ghost of the girl she might have been hurt, confused, longing for a story that made sense of her life. Then the shutters came down, "Get out," Miranda whispered. "Just get out." A year later, the Hawthorne Garden of Justice opened not just as a park, but as a history center. Catherine Aldridge's diaries were displayed alongside Arthur's letter. The story wasn't simple, it was messy, human, full of mistakes and secrets and unintended consequences. But it was true. Thomas used his share of the trust to endow the initiative permanently. Serena, Miranda's daughter, joined the board, having found her own peace in painting portraits of complex women, her grandmother, Catherine, Eleanor, even Miranda in her many guises. Eleanor, tending her roses one last autumn, felt the circle close. The poison had been named, the roots exposed to light. Some wounds would never fully heal. Thomas still woke sometimes, gasping from dreams of prison bars. Serena still flinched at raised voices. Eleanor still visited. Miranda's graved she'd died quietly in her sleep 3 months after their last meeting, leaving no note. But the garden grew. New roses, hybrid varieties named Catherine Discourage, Arthur's promise, even Miranda's thorn. Life, persistent and blooming in the broken places. As the sun set, Thomas joined her. His own daughter, Eleonora, a fierce, bright law student beside him. "It's not the ending I expected," Thomas said, watching his mother prune with practiced hands. "Endings are overrated," Eleanor replied, smiling at her granddaughter. "It's the tending that matters. Day after day, truth after truth." She placed a final rose, a deep, resilient crimson, in Eleonora's hands. "Your turn now." And as the last light gilded the petals, 3 generations stood together in the garden, rooted in a complicated past, but growing, always growing, toward the light.